Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, hits, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dime Sportsbook. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Friday's UFC Fight Night 117 event, which takes place in Saitama, Japan. If you're unfamiliar with our format, Nick and I will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, we had no plays for UFC Fight Night 116. We also had no free bets for the event. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 117 features an 11 fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass and FXX this Friday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking things off on the lone Fight Pass bout for the preliminary card is a welterweight contest between Daichi Abe, who is 5-0, and Hyunju Lim, who is 13-6-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Lim minus 170, the comeback on Abe at plus 130. Right now, looking over to sponsored sportsbook 5dimes.eu. Currently, Lim is at minus 125 and Abe's at plus 105. I am a little bit surprised. I mean, Lim is the more popular fighter by far. He's had more UFC experience, more quality wins. Abe's obviously making his UFC debut, so he's a little bit unknown unless you do your due diligence and dig up his fights and watch him and research. So those people that came in early on the dog price, they obviously did do that, and I tip my hat to them. I think that this is a great fight, and I think there probably is some value at a dog price on Abe. That being said, Lim is definitely going to be a step up in competition, so it's going to be interesting how this fight plays out. Both these guys are primarily strikers. It should not disappoint as far as the stand-up aspect goes. I mean, both these guys have a lot of power. Both these guys throw with serious intent and usually knock people out when they do. So this is going to deliver, I think, as far as fireworks go. And again, it's a dog or pass situation here, and I'll get into it a little bit more. I mean, Abe, again, he's a little bit unknown, obviously making his UFC debut. He's a former high school judo champion, so he's got kind of that background in Japan. He's a king of Pancrase, a welterweight champion as well. So even though he's only 5-0, he's accomplished that feat already. So that's pretty impressive. I mean, I know, again, looking at his resume, a lot of the guys he's beaten so far in his career haven't really done much or accomplished much. I mean, his welterweight championship in Pancrase, he fought a decent opponent and got some experience, solid experience in that fight as well. So he's taking the right steps and strides. But if you look at his potential and his ability on the feet, he's nothing but impressive. I mean, the guy has speed, he's got power, he's got accuracy, he's got that killer instinct as well. And it doesn't seem like he's going to be a real powerful striker, but then he connects and you could just tell how people crumble. So that's the kind of power Abe does have. Defensively, though, there is a little bit of concern because he does have that kind of wild aggression at times. So he does leave himself susceptible to getting blasted, and he's been rocked if you see some of those fights. And again, that's against lesser competition. So Lim is a big step up, and that's the concern with Abe. His defense has to definitely tighten up a little bit here, and he's got to respect the power of Lim. I think he will. And one thing that should be said about Abe, though, he does get hit, but he seems to recover really well. So you tag him, he gets wobbled a little bit. I mean, it's not like he goes instantly out. I mean, it just usually takes a couple seconds for him to kind of get back on track and then start being aggressive again. So even though he has been susceptible to getting tagged, he recovers fairly quickly. And I do trust his chin. In fact, I trust it a little bit more than Lim. I mean, Lim, again, we all know the competition level that he's faced in the UFC, the knockouts that he's had. It's been pretty impressive for him. He's not an easy out at all. The guy is an explosive striker. I mean, his knee attack and his knee game and his clinch work is really impressive, especially with the timing and the accuracy of those as well. He's been in with good competition, as I mentioned before. He's got a pretty well-rounded game, even though he doesn't really tend to like to take the fight to the floor oftentimes. He can if he wants to. He does have some decent ground and pound, and he's a little bit of submission game to go along with it. So Lim is a little bit more well-rounded than Abe at this point, and he's a little bit more experienced at this point. But the problem here is I think Lim's going to be a little bit too slow on the feet, and I think that's going to give Abe a lot of openings and a lot of chances to get him out of there. So that's why I'm a little bit more confident in Abe's way. I think this is going to be a close fight. Either guy can win by knockout, but I have a little bit more faith in the debuting newcomer actually in this spot. So my pick is going to be Abe to upset Lim by knockout along the way.
The main difference between these guys is age. Abe is about 7 or 8 years younger than Lim. And then overall, they're very similar strikers. They both have a lot of power. They're both aggressive. The difference on the feet, though, is, as Nick mentioned, chin strength. Lim seems to be regressing a little bit now that he's getting a little older. He's taken more damage in fights. He's coming off of, a really poor performance against Mike Perry. Now, granted, Mike Perry has kind of showcased that he's a decent fighter in the welterweight division, but I mean, he absolutely destroyed Lim in Perry's UFC debut. I mean, Lim got dropped like 3 times before Perry finally finished the fight in the first round. So, Abe, while he's not quite as ferocious as Perry, I think that he's a little more composed, even though he is an aggressive, solid striker. And Abe can make some things happen. I mean, he has some beautiful uppercuts. Like, he has sneaky power where sometimes the guy just drops and you're like, whoa, what happened? Well, watching him fight in his pancreas fights, some of his pancreas fights are on UFC Fight Pass, so you can check those out. And, I like what I see out of Abe. And with Lim, a lot of his finishes were earlier in his career against some lower tier UFC competition. And a lot of the times he sets them up with just a brutal knee up the middle. Not even like in the clinch, like just a step in knee that kind of catches an opponent as they're changing levels. And I don't expect Abe to be changing levels much. I think he'll just be pushing forward, looking for combinations and looking to land a home for, an uppercut or a good right hand or a hook or something. And I think that pressure is going to, wear down Lim a little bit. The other issue with Lim is that on top of not having a very good chin anymore, he also doesn't have great conditioning. I mean, you look at his fight against Neil Magny, where he started out really strong, had Magny in big trouble in the first round, and then gassed out, and then Magny finished him. So I think as long as Abe can just keep up the pressure and doesn't walk into something, then there's a good chance that he either knocks Lin out just moving forward and finding a connection somewhere, or maybe Lim starts to slow down and Abe takes advantage there. The only real advantage Lim has in this fight is experience, but that doesn't really matter as much as he's starting to regress a little bit. And overall, Lim is the bigger guy, but Abe shouldn't have too much of an issue there, because I think at times Lim's size is a disadvantage because it takes away some of his ability to absorb punishment. We see that a lot with guys that cut a ton of weight to make their welterweight or whatever weight limit. So I'm going to pick Abe. I'm not super positive about this just because it's a UFC debut and this is a big test for him. But I think that this is a guy that the UFC is very interested in, and this would be a very impressive UFC debut if he can pull it off. So my pick is going to be Abe. Now, kicking off the FXX preliminary card and staying in the welterweight division, we have Shinzo Anzai, who is 9-2, taking on, I know it's Luke Jumeau, but UFC again doesn't have his freaking record. Taking on Luke Jumeau, who is 12-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds makers' perspective on this one?
I opened Jumeau minus 180, the comeback on Anzai at plus 140. Right now, looking over 5 times, it's Jumeau minus 245. The comeback on Anzai is at plus 205. So, needless to say, action coming in Jumeau's way. Some straight bets, some parlay action going his way as well. Not really that surprised. I figured that's the way more people would like to bet. Anzai just doesn't get a ton of the respect at the betting window, at least. I know that the dog bettors out there will probably want to take a stab, especially where the line is now at plus 205, because the guy is a beast. I mean, I believe his nickname is Animal, and that's for a reason. I mean, the guy is no slouch at all. He's going to bring it in this fight. So Jumeau is not in for an easy night here at all. That being said, he's a very talented fighter. I mean, I think it was nice to see him get his official UFC debut out of the way with a win. It was a tough fight against Dominic Steele. Dominic Steele was no slouch, so it was a pretty solid win. It was a close win. I mean, I realistically could have went either way, but Jumeau got the decision, and you can't really argue too much. He does have a TKD black belt, so he has a Taekwondo background. So he is a striking-based fighter, and you see it in his fights. A lot of times, though, he does like to sit back and counter. He has explosive power with those counter shots, whether it be his kicks or his hands. I mean, he really is a pretty decent striker. He's has some good accuracy as well. So he's a threat on the feet. He's got decent takedown defense. He's been working on that aspect of his game for a while, and it's starting to get better, no doubt. But that being said, I still think he's got some holes in his game. I mean, he needs to improve on all areas really still and become a little bit more well-rounded. He sits back a little bit too much, and you'd like to see him be more aggressive at times. If he can put his foot on the gas and be a little bit more of a push-forward type of fighter, Jumeau, then I think he would have even more success. But here, I don't know if he's going to be able to do that anyway. Anzai is the type of guy that is going to push forward for him. He's going to come in looking for those takedowns. I mean, Anzai's background basically is he's just, in my opinion, he's just a ultra-aggressive, powerful grinder. I mean, he comes in at you. He has a lot of his wins by knockout because of the kind of style that he has. He's just 100 miles an hour. I mean, he's looking to pin you against the fence, get you down, drop some bombs on you on the ground. If he can't get you on the ground, he's going to start swinging on up against the fence as well. He's been in wars. I mean, if you look back at some of his fights, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's the way he is. I mean, he'll just start banging, man. I mean, the guy has no fear at all. Now, he's been out for a couple years. He's had some injuries to recoup from. So, that's an interesting side note here to see how he recovers. But I'll tell you what, Anzai, again, he's no slouch at all. If you look back at his last fight against, Zapata, actually, I think that was a pretty impressive win because Zapata's no slouch in his own right. So Anzai's the type of fighter that can be a spoiler to most. So those of you guys that want to bet Jumeau at this price, I would stay away. There's no way I would bet 2.5 to 1, especially at this skill level and how these guys match up against Anzai. A guy looking to take the fight to the ground, and he's going to be the more aggressive fighter. I'm not sure if that's such a good idea. If Jumeau doesn't get rid of him, he might lose on the cards, or he might even get finished late himself. I mean, that's the kind of power Anzai possesses as well. So this is a trickier fight than the odds currently indicate. I'm not confident in this pick, but I am going to lean a little bit more towards Jumeau because I do think that his striking is good enough. Maybe he does catch Anzai on the way in. And he counters with a big shot and drops Anzai. He has been knocked out before. Anzai's chin overall is pretty solid. He's not easy to get rid of, but he does eat a lot of punches, and Jumeau has the type of power that could be effective enough to put him down. So I'm going to slightly lean towards Jumeau, but it is definitely a dog or pass situation here, especially at the current price. So my pick is Jumeau, but I think that Anzai is going to be more than game. So if you guys are betting this, just be careful out there.
Yeah, this fight's a bit of a toss-up for me. The big thing that scares me, obviously, is that Anzai has not fought in 2 years because of a back injury. And, who knows what happens there with back injuries can be really, tricky to really figure out. I mean, they can affect a lot of things. It could affect his conditioning. Obviously, ring rust is definitely a possibility here. Anzai's not getting any younger either. So, with this fight, what'll happen is I think they're pretty evenly matched. If Anzai had not had any injuries at all, I probably would have favored him decently with his history and with Jumeau potentially being susceptible to going to the ground. But with him being out, I think that makes it a lot tougher to really nail down. That being said, I like Anzai. I mean, his UFC debut fight against Alberto Mina was absolutely insane. Nick mentioned that he's been in some crazy wars. That was a crazy war, and it was not even that long. I mean, basically these guys just threw haymakers at each other until they gassed out in the first round, both of them, and then Mina ended up getting the TKO stoppage. I mean, it was absolutely nuts. But Anzai settled down and then returned to the octagon a year later and was a lot more composed. He was able to get takedowns against Roger Zapata and then eventually passed his guard and then got a TKO doctor stoppage in the third round of that fight. So Anzai he's more well-rounded than Jumeau, but on the feet, Jumeau is clearly the better striker. So with his striking background, Jumeau should be able to land some good kicks. He should be able to get things going there. And as long as, but if Anzai can kind of close the distance and make this fight a little uglier, get this to the floor, get this in the clinch, just put it in situations where Jumeau can't land the big strikes, then I still think Anzai has a really good shot of pulling this off. It's just more about the questions of how he's going to perform after he hasn't been able to compete the last 2 years, and the fact that, he's now in his 30s. The last time we saw him, he wasn't. So, there's a lot of question marks, but overall, skill for skill, I think Anzai is the better, more well-rounded fighter, and if he makes this a mixed martial arts fight and doesn't just stand and bang with Jumeau, then I think Anzai has a good shot of pulling this out with the takedowns. So I'm going to side with Shinzo Anzai, although I'm not crazy confident about it because, again, you just don't know what type of fighter is going to show up on fight night after that long of a layoff. Now, dropping down to the strawweight division, we have Syuri Kondo, who is 5-0, making her UFC debut against Chanmi Jeon, who is 5-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Kondo minus 130, the comeback on Jeon at minus 110 rather. So minus 130, minus 110 right now over at 5 dimes. Kondo's minus 115. The comeback on Jeon is at minus 105. So line margins have tightened up a little bit. Early action did come into Jeon early on. The line flipped actually, and she was favored. Now we're seeing action come back towards Kondo, and now obviously she's a slight favorite as well. So we're going to continue to see two-way action on this fight. And it's another one of those fights where I think a pick-em type of fight is appropriately set as far as line goes. We might see it flip back and forth, but it's going to stay around that ballpark. Tough fight. I mean, Kondo is definitely a popular Japanese fighter out there. She's into pro wrestling, so she's got that fan base behind her a little bit. She's also an MMA fighter, obviously. She has a karate background. So she's a complete combat sports type of athlete with, again, you mix in the pro wrestling that she's involved with. So she is an ultra popular, hyped fighter that's undefeated right now in MMA. She's aggressive. She has skill. I mean, it's not just all hype that's behind her. She's actually a pretty good fighter as well. She utilizes the cage really well. She has nice boxing. She looks for takedowns. So she's a very tough out. And Jeon is going to be tested here as well. I mean, she's coming in obviously off of her debut loss to Aldridge, which she was pretty impressive in that fight. Even though she lost, I mean, you could tell that she was raw before she even made her UFC debut. I'm talking about Jeon, obviously. And she held her own against Aldridge. And what I liked about Jeon in that fight was, even though she was getting beaten, she was pretty competitive, but she had so much fire in her eyes. I mean, she was hungry to get that W. She was smiling out there. She was having fun. And those are the type of fighters I like to see, the people that are going to improve and kind of take leaps and bounds between fights. And if you look at Jeon before she came to the UFC, there was so many holes and she just didn't look that great in her game. I mean, overall, you could tell she had some potential, but she looked a lot better in her UFC debut, and we actually mentioned that she probably would. So I think in her second fight now, with a full camp and with the proper preparation, with her octagon jitters out of the way, she's going to look even better. So this is going to be a fight. That's why I think this is going to be an awesome matchup. I think this might be one of the better fights of the night because both of these ladies are going to bring it. Kondo, again, has the experience, has a little bit of the edge because she's a little bit more well-rounded. But I think Jeon is going to actually hold her own, and she's going to be aggressive enough that she's going to give Kondo some fits. So I'm actually going to pick her slight to win. I'm going to go against the grain right now and pick the underdog here, but I think it is going to be a heck of a war, and it'll be back and forth. In fact, if anything, I'm worried about Kondo possibly getting a couple takedowns along the way and maybe stealing close rounds that way. So that's my concern, I guess, in this fight. Outside of that, though, if Jeon is able to keep off her back in this fight, I think she's going to be the more aggressive fighter, and I think she'll land the harder punches along the way, too. So I think that's going to sway the judges. She might do a little bit more damage to Kondo, and I think she could pull off the victory here. So I know it's not quite a popular opinion out there, but I think that Jeon is going to take another step forward, and she's going to look great, and she's going to get a solid win on her resume. So the pick is Jeon to defeat Kondo here.
While I understand the sentiment with Jeon, the skill does not match up. Jeon still lost all 3 rounds against J.J. Aldridge. As enthusiastic as she was about, getting punched in the face, she still was not very talented. She was just enthusiastically getting beat up for the most part. So this time around, yeah, it's a bit of a step down, but Aldridge wasn't a world beater either. I mean, she's a pretty low-level women's strawweight, and now she's taking on Kondo, and I really think that Kondo has some potential. I mean, she's has a professional wrestling background, which, yeah, obviously those guys haven't had a lot of the most success unless you're Brock Lesnar. But But she didn't just do professional wrestling. She had shoot boxing. She had kickboxing career that was basically from 2009 to 2015, where she went 13-1. Pretty impressive. And then she officially transitioned to mixed martial arts last year, and she's been aggressive with that. She's been fighting. She's fought 5 times, has picked up 5 victories, 4 of them by decision, 1 by TKO in that time, and they were all been under the Pancrase banner. And she actually won the Pancrase women's strawweight title in her last bout this past May. So, and Kondo's still just 28 years old, so she's accomplished so much already, and she still is relatively young. Now, obviously, Jeon is younger. She's 20. She's one of the youngest fighters in the octagon. But with how raw Jeon is, and I know that she's capable of making some leaps, but I don't think that she's ready to make that leap just yet. I mean, she just fought this past June. I mean, there's only so much you can improve with over like a 3-month span. Like basically she just went right back into training camp. Like now if she had an extended break, then maybe I would think that Jeon could take a leap, but just not after such a short time off between fights. So with this fight, I just think Kondo is going to be the better striker, definitely. Jeon clearly is not a great striker. And then on the ground, while Jeon would prefer it goes to the ground, I think Kondo should hold her own on the ground as well, just with her background. So overall, I just think Kondo's the better fighter. I think she's the better prospect at this point. Maybe Jeon has more potential down the line because of her age, but at this point in their careers, Kondo is clearly the more experienced and talented fighter, and I think that she doesn't just win, she probably wins easily. So my pick is going to be Kondo. Now moving up to the flyweight division, we have Jussier Formiga, who is 19-5, taking on Oka Sasaki, who is 24-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Formiga minus 475. The comeback on Sasaki at plus 325. Right now, looking over 5 dimes, it's Formiga minus 450. The comeback on Sasaki is plus 360. So line margins have tightened up a little bit. 2-way action coming into this fight. Line seems appropriately set. I think both guys are definitely 2 of the better flyweights on the UFC roster. There's no doubt about that. Talented guys, both really grappling-based fighters though. So you got grappler versus grappler here. I know they both have evolved their skill set a little bit more than that. I think Formiga actually has looked more impressive on the feet for his grappling base than Sasaki has. Sasaki has some length and he's getting a little bit better on the feet as well, but and he has a southpaw kind of look as well. So he can be a little awkward at times, but I still think Formiga is the more capable and the more effective striker. So he's going to have a reach disadvantage, though he's got to be cautious with. But outside of that, I think Formiga is going to be the one that gets the best of things standing on the feet. Now, on the ground, again, it should be kind of a scratch, but you cannot compare the two, I think, overall. I think Formiga is definitely the better and more advanced grappler. Sasaki is pretty game, like we said in the past. I mean, he does take advantage of people that have a little bit of a hole in their game on the ground and usually is able to get the submission win. But against Formiga, he doesn't have too many holes on the ground. He's the one that basically dictates the pace and the control and the scrambling and everything when it comes to the ground game. In fact, he likes to hang on people's backs. So if Sasaki makes one mistake, he's going to have a backpack on his back in Formiga for the rest of the round. So that's the kind of fighter Formiga is. He's just very awkward, very tough to deal with. And especially with his experience and his improvement, he is just a tough out for Sasaki right now. So the line might be a tad bit high. I mean, maybe we're underestimating Sasaki because again, he seems to be getting a little bit better. I mean, he's been pretty solid as of late as well. He's been impressive again. I mean, he had all sorts of hype coming into his UFC debut and then he had some letdowns. Now he's looking like he's a little bit back in form and he's kind of figured things out a little bit. So to me, I think that Sasaki is going to perform well, but I just think Formiga is going to be too much for him. So I do think stylistically it's a bad matchup, and that's why you're seeing the high price, and that's why it's staying pretty steady right now at minus 450. So the pick is Formiga to win, probably on the cards, but I wouldn't be surprised if Formiga maybe possibly finds a sub along the way as well. So Formiga is the pick, though.
Overall, I do like Formiga here. I just think it's a bad stylistic matchup for Oka Sasaki. Now, Sasaki has had a decent run in the flyweight division, picking up a really quality win over Justin Scoggins in his last fight. But I just don't think that's enough. I mean, you look at Sasaki's history against really talented grapplers, and it just doesn't go well for him. He has, when he was at bantamweight, Issa just smoked him. And then when he dropped down to flyweight, he took on Wilson Hayes, and Wilson Hayes got the better of him on the ground too for the most part, except in the third round when Sasaki kind of got his back. But, so in this fight, Formiga is a better grappler to me, for at least in my opinion, than Hayes. So when this goes to the ground, and it almost certainly will go to the ground, I see Formiga having the advantage in terms of transitions, scrambles. I expect him to get top position. I expect him to take Sasaki's back at times. I just don't see him losing grappling exchanges. And Sasaki, while he is long, he can get out grappled, even though he does come from a grappling base. So I like Formiga on the ground, and then I like Formiga on the feet. Formiga's actually taken his stand-up game to another level. Like he had a really nice striking performance when Formiga fought Wilson Hayes. I thought Formiga held his own against Ray Borg on the feet in his last loss. And overall, Formiga's just one of the elite fighters in the UFC flyweight division. I know Sasaki's fighting in Japan. He's Japanese. He's going to have the crowd behind him, but that's just not going to be enough to me. I think Formiga is just overall better just about everywhere, and I think that he ends up getting the victory. So my pick is going to be Jussier Formiga. Now moving on to the main event of the preliminary card on FXX. We have a welterweight contest between Keita Nakamura, who is 32-8-2 with 1 no contest, and he's taking on Alex Morano, who is 13-4. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Morano minus 150 to come back on Nakamura at plus 110. Right now, looking over 5 dimes, it is currently Morano minus 135 to come back on Nakamura at plus 115. So line margins have tightened up a little bit. Two-way action coming in this fight as well. And another difficult fight, really. I mean, if you look at it, Nakamura is always one of these guys that doesn't get enough respect. I mean, he's tough as nails. He's been around the sport for so long. I mean, at age 33 in MMA years, he's way beyond that. But it seems like it hasn't affected him too bad. I mean, he's been pretty solid. And again, since he came into the UFC this go around, he's been, I think, pretty impressive. He's faced decent competition. He's really got to shown to utilize his ground game. I mean, it really is a thing of beauty. He's able to get the takedowns oftentimes, and once he gets top position and he's able to grind people out, he also is more than capable of winning by sub. He gets your back, or he's pretty slick on the ground. He's always looking to improve or to get position and look for the finish, really. So Nakamura is that type of fighter. Again, he's been nothing but, in my opinion, impressive overall. And I mean, I wasn't expecting him to do much. That's basically where I'm getting at here. I thought on this go around in the UFC, Nakamura is probably hitting that spot where he's, on the decline. He's going to get knocked out a few times and that's it. He'll probably, go away, but he's not. I mean, in his last fight, he faced a very game, Zaleski, and he was able to hold his own there. He lost by decision, but I mean, against a powerful striker, that chin got tested quite a few times, and he's been wobbled and he's been hurt in fights, but he finds a way to survive. He had an impressive win over Noak the time before that. A lot of people were surprised that Nakamura was able to finish him like he did. So that's impressive. I mean, Nakamura, again, he's just a tough fighter that's hard to get rid of, and if you make a mistake against him, especially on the ground, you're going to pay for it. So Morano, he's going to have the striking advantage here, and he's been another one that's really impressed, honestly. I mean, he's got the youth advantage over Nakamura, obviously. He hasn't had all that experience and all those wars that Nakamura's been through, so he's a little bit of the fresher fighter in this spot, although he is coming off a brutal knockout loss against Nico Price. I mean, he was winning that fight, and then Price was able to pick it up and get the knockout right at the end of round 2. It was kind of crazy. Go back and check that fight out. So that's kind of a head-scratcher. We'll see how he performs coming off of a knockout loss like that. I mean, you never know, but I think overall, obviously, Morano does have the striking advantage in this fight. He does pack a punch. I mean, a little bit underrated striking, and he's a pretty complete fighter. He's not hard, or he's not an easy guy to sub on the ground either. He's faced some decent grapplers, and all these guys a lot of times have been able to put Morano on his back, but Morano is able to weather the storm, and then when the fight stands upright, he's able to take control and win some fights. So Morano's going to have to do that same exact thing here. He's going to have to stuff the takedowns of Nakamura, keep this fight upright, and look to knock him out. It's going to be a very difficult fight, I think, for both guys here. And we're going to see who utilizes their game plan the best. I think Morano has enough in him that even if Nakamura is winning this fight early, it's a 3-round fight. I think he's going to find his spot on the feet eventually to probably test that chin or do enough damage along the way to kind of squeak by this fight. So not a confident pick. I mean, the odds are tight for a reason as well. I think it's either Nakamura by ground, meaning that he grinds him out for a few rounds and gets the win, or it's going to be Morano probably finishing Nakamura on the feet, or maybe, again, being effective enough standing where Nakamura just survives some rounds and he wins on the scorecards as well. So not a confident pick here because of the stylistic matchup, but I think you have to lean a little bit more towards Morano in this spot.
And while Morano did get knocked out in his last fight, that result ended up being overturned because Nico Price had a failed drug test. But regardless, that is going to affect how he performs. I mean, Daniel Cormier is probably going to fight a little differently the next time we see him, despite the result against John Jones in the rematch getting overturned. So that is something that we have to consider is he going to be as aggressive as he was before? Now, Nakamura, this is a guy, he's fought 43 times professionally. He's only been knocked out 1 time. So he has a great chin. And while he did get rocked by Yi Jinglong in one of his UFC fights, a couple times actually, Jinglong has actually showcased a lot of power. He has a bunch of knockouts now in his UFC resume. So I think that's actually a testament to Nakamura, his durability and his ability to recover from getting hurt, that Nakamura did not end up getting knocked out by Jinglong. So here, Morano, while he's aggressive and is a decent striker, he's actually not that great of a technical striker. Like, so far, his 2 UFC wins, he was facing guys that just were either on a decline or were just not able to stand and trade with him. So, and I think that kind of has pumped him up a little bit with his fight. Like, Mutasari gassed horribly in that fight, and he's a former lightweight. So, Morano was just able to ride that wave of momentum a little bit. And Nakamura is not going to gas, I don't think, at all. This guy has a lot of experience. He's well-rounded. He mixes things up. He's not terrible on the feet either. I'm not saying that Nakamura is going to have a great performance on the feet and that he'll outstrike Morano, but I don't think he'll get embarrassed there. And then when this fight goes to the ground, Nakamura is going to have a big advantage. Morano doesn't have the greatest takedown defense, but we haven't really seen people try to take him down. Kyle Noke got 1 takedown against him, and he's not a great takedown artist or wrestler. So if Nakamura pursues the takedown, I think he's going to get it. And as long as he can keep closing the distance and kind of taking away Morano's weapons, I think Morano's going to have a tough time. So there's going to be in Japan. The crowd's going to be behind Nakamura. Nakamura's the more well-rounded guy. Nakamura has superior wrestling and takedowns and ground game. I think that all factors in. And the fact that Nakamura is pretty durable, I think Nakamura is going to be victorious here. I just expect he'll either ride out a decision or maybe even get a submission victory if Morano starts to fade a little bit down the stretch. So my pick is going to be Kaita Nakamura. Now moving on to the main card. Also on FXX, we have a featherweight contest between Mizuto Hirota, who is 19-8-2, and Charles Rosa, who is 11-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Rosa, minus 210. The comeback on Hirota at plus 160. Right now, looking over 5 times, it's actually Rosa minus 190. The comeback on Hirota plus 165. So line margins have tightened up a little bit. 2-way action coming into this fight. Man, this is another tough one. It's not an easy fight at all. I mean, stylistically, these guys match up well together. I think Hirota is the better striker. Hirota is obviously the more experienced fighter. He's faced a lot of good, solid competition throughout his career. Another one of these guys that kind of made it over to the UFC a little bit later than I would liked because, I mean, he had so much talent, so much potential. And right now what you're seeing is a pretty solid version of Hirota, but I think in his youth coming over, getting this kind of experience that he's had recently would have benefited him a whole lot. So you can never count Hirota out, man. I mean, he's worked so hard that obviously he's a striking-based fighter, and that's what he's known for, but his wrestling's come around, and it's very solid, offensively and defensively. I mean, he's not the easiest guy to take down these days. I know, again, he's been taken down, and he does get beat that way at times, but you have to be a really talented wrestler / grappler to get the job done against Hirota if you are going to win that route. So Hirota is a type of fighter that likes to sprawl, brawl, stand and bang, and then usually is effective enough on the feet that he lands some damage along the way, and he can beat you up. I mean, he can knock you out. He can outpoint you. He's just a very difficult out. And I think, again, he will have the striking advantage over a guy like Rosa. Now, Rosa's a little bit younger, of course, especially in MMA years. I mean, he's much younger than that. He's had a little bit of time off, of course. And he says that he's really worked on his game and he's improved things. And, you know, he's ready to kind of, you know, prove to everybody that he's, you know, a better version of himself. And I'd like to see that because Rosa has a ton of skill, a lot of potential. He is a very solid fighter. In fact, he's more well-rounded than Hirota overall. I mean, because Rosa's striking is really not that bad. I mean, again, I don't think it's his best attribute. He mixes everything up well enough that I think he's pretty good everywhere. I mean, his ground game's pretty good as well. He's more than capable of submitting people off his back, submitting people from the top. He scrambles well. Again, his wrestling's okay. I think it needs a little bit more work and he needs to be a little bit more dominant in that area, obviously. And that's where it's going to probably be the difference here in this fight. If he struggles with the wrestling against Hirota, then I think he's going to probably get outstruck by Hirota as well. But I think Rosa's talented enough that he can mix everything up well enough that he still will squeak by. I think this is going to be a split decision type of fight, honestly, if it does hit the scorecards. I think it's going to be tough for Rosa to submit Hirota, and I think it's going to be tough for Rosa to knock Hirota out, even though, again, he's at 36 years old. Hirota, his chin is not really getting any better, obviously, with the age, and he's been, you know, through all those wars, he's been getting rocked at times. But again, he's a tough guy. He's never been officially knocked out in his career, so it's going to be hard for Rosa to finish Hirota, so it probably will hit the scorecards. So that's why this is another situation where I really think at the betting window, it's a dog or pass situation. If you're talking about a close fight that's going to hit the cards more than likely, you have to kind of lean with a dog here as far as a pure bet goes. Now, as far as pick goes, though, I'll still side with Rosa just slightly. I think that, again, he's more well-rounded enough that maybe he steals a takedown in a very close competitive round on the feet, or, you know, he's able to pin Hirota up against a cage long enough to maybe stall some time that way in the round that he's winning. So I think Rosa will find a way to squeak by in this fight. So I will slightly lean his way, but man, Hirota's game. And again, if you're going to bet this fight, I wouldn't lay the chalk on Rosa. That's for sure. Hirota could end up being a sleeper here in a live dog. So the pick is Rosa, but not a confident one. I think this is going to be a split decision type of fight. So I think Hirota will be more than game.
This is one of the trickier fights on the card for me, honestly. I mean, Hirota is a game veteran that's been fighting for ages, but is still able to go out there and get results at times. And Rosa is a guy that is active and aggressive and fun to watch, but sometimes he just doesn't have the best performances. But he's also been matched against some really tough fighters. So, you know, again, this is a tricky matchup. Now, Rosa has had some good performances. I mean, obviously, Sean Soriano, Kyle Bochniak, but, you know, those guys aren't even in the UFC. So, but when he's been matched against, you know, Dennis Seaver, Yair Rodriguez, even Shane Burgos in his last fight, although he was performing well, he's wound up on the losing end. And I am a little concerned about the fact that Rosa did get knocked out in his last fight. You know, that can change a fighter a little bit. Hirota, on the other hand, you know, this is a guy that has been there and done that just about everywhere. You know, he hasn't had the most success in the UFC either, on it, obviously, but I mean, he is a solid overall fighter. He's had a history of success against decent competition. Now, granted, in his UFC run so far, hasn't gone the best. I mean, he originally was in the UFC, lost a pair of fights to Rodrigo Dam and Hanayaya, left, came back on that kind of reality show that they did for Japan. Like, people aren't really aware of that, but it also spawned Ishihara, who's also on the card, They ended up fighting to a split draw, and then since then, he's gone 1-1. Now, I'm not going to hold anything against Hirota for his last fight. Losing to Alexander Volkanovski, that guy is a beast. Volkanovski got 4 takedowns in that fight, just got top position, and was able to win. But before that, Hirota looked pretty good against Cole Miller. Like, he was settled in, he had a composed striking, and then he even got takedowns against Miller, which I thought was impressive. This guy is a well-rounded fighter, and he is capable of mixing it up. But usually people have seen him, at least in his UFC run, for the most part, striking. So the fact that Hirota can go to the ground if he wants to against somebody that is as scary and ability to go for submissions like Cole Miller and find success there is very promising. So with Charles Rosa not having the best wrestling game, maybe Hirota takes the fight to the ground for him. And then if Rosa can't kind of get a sweep or a transition, then Hirota could just ride out some rounds in top position. Now, on the feet, I also favor Hirota. I think that, obviously he's got the experience on the feet. Rosa might have a little bit of the size. He's got a slight height and reach advantage, but Hirota should make up for that with technique and aggression. So, overall, I just think Hirota is the better fighter. I know he's getting older now, but at 36 years old, so that is a concern. But, Rosa's not a spring chicken either at 31. So, honestly, I think Mizuto Hirota can pull this off. As long as he doesn't wind up on his back or pressed against the fence for extended periods of time, then Hirota could ride this fight out from top position, and I think that he can outstrike Rosa over the course of 3 rounds. I see him winning a decision, so my pick is going to be Mizuto Hirota. Now, sticking with the featherweight division, we have Teruto Ishihara, who we just mentioned, who is 10-4-2, taking on Rolando D, who is 8-5-1 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I open Ishihara minus 175. The comeback on D at plus 135. Right now, over 5 times, Ishihara is minus 155. D is at plus 135. So line margins have tightened up a little bit. 2-way action is coming in on this fight as well. Early on, some dog action came in on D. As we speak, more action coming in Ishihara's way as well. So this will continue to go that way. I expect Ishihara to climb maybe a little bit more in the betting window, and then maybe we'll see it drop before fight time as well. So this is going to be interesting to see which way the line continues to move a little bit back and forth, or and then obviously the result of this fight as well, because you have 2 entertaining fighters coming in here. I know D made his official UFC debut on short notice against Caceres in his last fight, and I think that he was a very game fighter in that fight. I don't know what exactly how to phrase it, I guess you could say, because again, there was a lot of things stacked against him in that spot because he was coming in on short notice. Caceres is a pretty talented fighter, regardless of the respect factor he gets. I think more and more fans and more bettors are coming around on Caceres and realizing that he is a pretty solid out, but a tough out. I mean, he's a very talented fighter. So making your UFC debut against a fighter like that is not necessarily easy. And he did get tagged up in that fight pretty good. He got rocked a few times by Caceres. Caceres was definitely winning that fight. And then unfortunately for D, it got stopped. I know he was disappointed, but a nice punch that landed early on in that fight, ended up, kind of hurting D's eye, and he wasn't able to see after that. So they went ahead, the doctors, referees stopped the fight. I believe it was the ref that stopped it officially in that spot. But that being said, he was very disappointed, and now with a full training camp, that octagon experience behind him, he's going to come into this fight, and I think he's going to be more than game and more than ready to prove that he belongs on the UFC roster. If you look at his resume overall, he's like 8-5 or something like that. It's not very impressive, but if you look at what he's done as of late a little bit more so, and you look at his actual skill and the improvements that he's made, I think he's better than his record indicates, honestly. That's why Ishihara is going to have his hands full. We all know Ishihara, what he's made of. Brian just touched on it a little bit ago. I mean, obviously he came from the Ultimate Fighter. He had that war with Hirota that ended up in the split draw, whatever it was. But that being said, Ishihara after that, man, I mean, the popularity that he's really brought upon himself, and it's basically a lot of his social media, a lot of the way he acts, and he's kind of a goofy guy, man. I mean, he's the type of guy that loves to tweet photos and on social media or whatever with women and having fun and partying and that kind of rock star type of lifestyle that he lives. But as of late, it hasn't really translated well in the cage. I mean, he fought a very tough opponent, obviously, in Gray Maynard, even though Maynard is past his prime at this point. and he got grounded out in that fight. But before that, what was disappointing was the Lobov fight. I mean, he was a solid favorite against Artem Lobov, and he just disappointed. I mean, he wasn't very aggressive at all. He let Lobov dictate that fight. I mean, it was just a terrible, terrible performance from Ishihara, a surprising one. I mean, a lot of people were expecting Ishihara to just come in guns blazing, and he really didn't. I mean, he was a shell of himself in a way in that fight. So Ishihara's coming off back-to-back losses. I mean, again, different stylistic matchups, and now he's fighting a guy that nobody really, I mean, I hate to say it that way, but nobody really cares about in D. So this seems like a good rebound spot for Ishihara here, especially stylistically if you look at it. Ishihara does throw some bombs, and he's a heavy hitter, and if he lands on D, I mean, Caceres was able to rock him a little bit, then you'd expect Ishihara to maybe be able to finish the job. I don't think it's going to happen, though. I think what we're going to see here is a back-and-forth kind of war. I think D, again, maybe he's a little bit underrated, especially with his fighting with against Caceres. People think he's maybe a little bit hittable, and he's got a weak chin or whatnot. I think D is going to hold his own even on the feet. I think he does have power in his punches. I think he can land some punishment on Ishihara's chin along the way. I think D actually has a better ground game overall. Ishihara is not an easy guy to take down. Again, Maynard was able to do it, but that's an outstanding wrestler that's able to grind him out. Ishihara overall usually has decent takedown defense for the most part, but D's going to test that. I think D's more than capable of out-grappling Ishihara. It's just going to be a competitive all-around fight, I think, across the board. So can this fight end early with one punch either way? I believe so, and if that happens, it's probably Ishihara maybe stopping D, but I'm still going to side with the dog here. I think D's going to perform a lot better than all of us expect. I think he's going to show up here and prove that he belongs on the roster and get the W. So I'm going to go against the grain here, and I'm going to pick D to pull off the upset victory over Ishihara.
Now, clearly, Ishihara has disappointed in his last couple fights. I mean, this is a guy that has a lot of personality and has a lot of power, and he's aggressive and wild, and he was able to pick up some really wild finishes in his beginning to his UFC career. I mean, even the fight against Hirota, a solid veteran, like Ishihara had him hurt repeatedly in that fight before eventually starting to gas a little bit. That's kind of been Ishihara's MO. He goes out there, he's aggressive, he has a lot of power, he has a strong kicking game. Like, he's very solid early in a fight, and then he starts to slow down. So, against D, basically, Ishihara needs to get this fight out and get rid of him early. I think Ishihara just needs to knock him out. Now D is, he's better than he looks. I mean, when he faced, Caceres in his UFC debut, D, he was performing pretty well, and then he got hurt a couple times, and then, Caceres was able to, land a punch that hit him in the eye somehow, with the knuckle. It wasn't a finger poke, and then they eventually stopped the fight. So, it was kind of a tough loss there, but again, D was getting hurt repeatedly on the feet. And Alex Caceres, as improved as he is, he's not the most powerful striker. So Ishihara, I think, as long as he can connect, I think there's a good chance that he doesn't just hurt D. I think he puts him away. My big concern, though, is if he hurts D and really pushes for the finish and doesn't get it, maybe D can turn the tables on him as Ishihara starts to gas. And he will gas if this fight gets to the third round. That's just the type of fighter he is. The good news is that D doesn't have a great ground game. He doesn't have much of a wrestling game, so you can kind of take that out the window in terms of the threat to Ishihara. I think a good wrestler like Gray Maynard in his last fight was able to completely neutralize Ishihara's offense. While D is a decent striker, he won't be able to neutralize Ishihara's offense. And I just think Ishihara overwhelms him at some point and gets the knockout. So I'm a little concerned about him gassing, but I think that hopefully he avoids having to gas by getting a first-round finish. So my pick is going to be Ishihara. Now, moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have the UFC debut of kickboxer Gokhan Saki, who is 0-1. And he's taking on Luis Henrique da Silva, who is 12-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Saki minus 160 to come back on Da Silva at plus 120. Right now we're 5 dimes. It's Saki minus 175, Da Silva plus 155. So more action, a little bit more action coming in Saki's way. Line seems, again, appropriately set. And that was a tough line, I'll tell you what. I mean, we all know that what's supposed to happen here, right? There's no secret at all. I mean, Saki is one of the best strikers in the world, coming from Glory Kickboxing, the most prestigious kickboxing in the organization, in my opinion, in the world. I mean, just talented fighter. So Saki is a world-class striker that, I mean, in the light heavyweight division, he will be a welcome addition. There's no doubt about that, because his stand-up is that elite. But the problem here is he's 0-1 in MMA. He hasn't fought since 2004 when he lost. We really don't know much, about him other than the striking force. If this fight stays up on the feet, he's going to probably destroy De Silva. But the problem here is, unless De Silva is just a complete idiot, he's going to be looking for takedowns. And we don't know what kind of takedown defense Saki really has right now. I know that he's been putting the work in. He's been working his wrestling. He's been working that takedown defense. I get it. He's been working with the likes of Gustafsson, Latifi out there, in Sweden as well at All Stars. He's been putting in some, time in Abu Dhabi, I believe, as well. He's just been working a lot on his game overall, outside of the striking realm. And that's exactly what he has to do. And he's really a confident fighter. I mean, Saki thinks that he's going to just kind of run through the light heavyweight division and on his way to a title shot eventually. And you got to kind of speak that way. Now, do I believe it? I don't know. I hope he's right, man. I hope, meaning, obviously I don't believe it. I think I'm obviously skeptical about his ground game still, and I will be until he proves us otherwise. But that's the thing. I mean, he needs to come out here and talk that way. You have to. If you're a fighter, you got to be confident in your ability. So hopefully Saki is a lot better than I think he is on the ground. If he can fend off De Silva's takedown game, I think he's going to obviously win. But the problem here, again, De Silva should go for takedowns, and he should be able to get some takedowns here as well. And if all it might take is one, I mean, De Silva is a jiu-jitsu black belt. He's pretty game on the ground. Even though he doesn't have a lot of subs on his resume, still, I mean, you could see he has an advantage on the ground, whether it's from top position, whether it's from his back as well. He's capable of finishing opponents. So Saki has to be very cautious. So I guess the writing is on the wall. We understand what's supposed to happen here. Saki's supposed to go out and have a highlight reel knockout, and then there's going to be all sorts of celebration, a new fighter, hyped fighter, blah, 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 all that stuff. But I mean, we're going to have to really see Saki prove it a few fights for me to be completely sold on him. Again, I'm rooting for the guy. I'm more than loving the fact that a world-class kickboxer like Saki coming to the UFC, hopefully he does have success. And this is a good test for him to start things off, because I think De Silva, even though he's not really the most respected fighter out there on the roster, I think stylistically he's not the easiest fight you can give Saki. I mean, I think UFC could have threw him a bone and said, here, even though De Silva is like one fight away from being cut from the roster completely, I still think that De Silva's ground game is a factor, and they could have gave Saki a striker is what I'm trying to spit out here. So, interesting matchmaking, interesting fight. But I am going to side with Saki. I mean, I guess that's what we're all supposed to do, right? So I am skeptical about his ground, as I mentioned, but I think Saki probably does deliver in a knockout, so I'm going to pick him to win this fight.
Yeah, the big thing here is, will it go to the ground? Because if it does, I'm definitely concerned. I mean, that's how you feel whenever a really good striker transitions into MMA. I mean, Gokhan Saki is a world-class kickboxer. This guy has been in there against some of the best in the world repeatedly. He is absolutely incredible with his stand-up. I mean, kicking, especially with kickboxing, that helps a little bit because, he's not just a puncher. I mean, this guy has fast hands, but his kicks are extremely potent as well. The big question, though, is Luis Enrique da Silva, what happens if he gets into the floor? Because Saki, he hasn't fought in MMA, like a real professional MMA fight, since 2004, when he was 20 years old about. So, as ancient history, and he lost that fight. So, he clearly, there's a reason that he didn't fight MMA again for 14 years. He wanted to focus on the stand-up. So, has he been able to work on his takedown defense? Is his ground game up to snuff, at least to the point where he's not an embarrassment? We're going to find out. Hopefully, we don't have to find out this fight, because Luis Enrique da Silva, they're basically keeping him around because he can be a bit of a punching bag. I mean, he did start out, De Silva did start out his UFC career with 2 wins, but he has looked progressively worse and worse in each of his last 3 fights. I mean, it started with the loss to Paul Craig, then Jordan Johnson just steamrolled him with a bunch of takedowns, and then in his last fight, I mean, Ian Cutelaba took him out in a hurry. So, now, taking on Gokhan Saki, I mean, if Cutelaba can smash De Silva, I mean, just think what Saki can do if he just is able to connect with something solid. De Silva does not have a good chin. He's not durable. He does not fight well when he's hurt. So if Saki can just put him down, and then if he doesn't knock him out straight, he should just let him back up, knock him down again until he isn't able to get back up. That's basically the game plan for Saki. Avoid the ground at all costs. I don't care how much extra work he's been putting in. He's just not quite ready for that, probably. So my pick's going to be Saki. I think that they basically kept De Silva around to get knocked out by Saki, and that's probably what happens here. But anything can happen in an MMA fight. We've seen a lot of hyped up UFC debuts or MMA debuts end very poorly. So anything can happen, but I'm going to pick Saki to pick this one up. Now, dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Takanori Gomi, who is 35-13 with 1 no contest, taking on Donghyun Maestro Kim, the lightweight version, who is 14-8-3. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up at Kim minus 270, the comeback on Gomi at plus 190. Right now, over 5 dimes is Kim minus 380, the comeback on Gomi plus 315. So needless to say, and I'm not even that surprised, everybody fading Gomi. Right now, coming in on Kim, straight bets, parlays. I mean, just everybody expects Gomi's chin to let down. And then Kim is obviously a pretty solid fighter at this point of his career. I mean, he's obviously a level ahead of Gomi, and he's a dangerous opponent for Gomi. So everybody's fade Gomi right away, fade Gomi type of deal. And I'll tell you what, you better hope that Kim does get rid of him early on, because if this fight goes to the scorecard, it's going to be interesting, because Gomi offensively, the guy can still, I think, deliver a little bit. But the problem is, I get it, I understand, and I'm not picking Gomi, don't get me wrong here, because I do think that his chin and the wars that he's had throughout the years of his fighting career have finally caught up to him. I mean, he was 38 years old. He's fighting a guy that's basically 9 years younger than him, that does hit very hard. I mean, he's a striking-based fighter. I mean, Kim is more well-rounded overall than Gomi is as well, but he's more of a striking-based fighter as well. So Kim's going to look to stand and bang with Gomi, probably put him out. I think that's probably what does happen, considering, I mean, Gomi's been KO'd 3 out of his last 4 fights. So he is definitely past his prime. There's no question about that. So, but offensively, again, Gomi can still deliver. I mean, that's one thing you don't lose, is that power. So, and Kim is susceptible to being knocked out. He's been knocked out a couple times in his career as well. And if Gomi lands, he can put him out. So that's the crazy factor here. And of course, Gomi's going to have all that, the crowd behind him. I mean, he was one of the biggest legends in the whole sport of MMA over in Japan. We all know that. I mean, dating back to his Pride days, all that. I mean, he's just, at one time, Gomi, obviously, for those of you guys that are kind of newbies to the sport, Gomi was the best lightweight in the world. I mean, widely regarded as the best lightweight in the world. The guy was just, I mean, nasty on the feet. People couldn't touch him. His wrestling background in most cases was good enough to keep the fight upright, and then he'd just punish you on the feet. So that's what Gomi brought to the table. So years ago, this would be a joke. I mean, Gomi would be a decent sized favorite in this fight, but it's not. Years ago, it's 2017, and this UFC in this year, I mean, this, generation, I mean, Kim is definitely the person to probably beat Gomi in this spot here. So, unfortunately for Gomi, I think he suffers another loss. I mean, most people do out there as well. And where the line is right now, though, laying 4-1, I mean, Kim, I don't know. I don't trust Kim enough. So I would recommend you guys kind of stay away at this point, and maybe just, again, wait to fade Gomi if he's on the roster. Maybe next time if you get a better price. We'll see. But I think this might be his last fight if he does lose. I mean, he might want to hang him up, honestly. I don't want to see Gomi keep on getting knocked out, to be honest with you either. So we'll see how it plays out. I just think that it's hard not to pick Kim in this spot. I mean, obviously most of you guys are out there as well. So the pick is Kim to win, and probably by knockout, obviously.
I agree with pretty much everything you said, except for the fact that Kim is going to stand and bang in this fight. That would be dumb. I mean, Takanori Gomi has a lot of power, and pretty much the only way he can win this fight is if he knocks Kim out. So why play with fire? I mean, Kim got finished in the 3rd round of his first 2 UFC fights. I mean, the UFC debut on short notice against Dominic Steele, he got slammed and knocked out in the 3rd round. Then Polo Reyes, he had a crazy back and forth war that he just faded and got knocked out in the 3rd round. Then he wisened up. He faced Brandon O'Reilly in his last fight, and he took the fight to the floor, got 4 takedowns, 8 guard passes, ended up winning a unanimous decision. So if I'm Donghyun Maestro Kim, why would I even think about standing and banging with Takanori Gomi? I mean, that is literally the only way Gomi can win. So I think Kim closes the distance, gets this fight to the floor. Gomi has been complete garbage on the ground. in his UFC career. I mean, it started with his UFC debut against Kenny Florian when he got submitted, but he got tapped out by Nate Diaz, and then more recently, he's just been getting smashed on the ground by Joe Lozon. He got knocked out on the feet by Miles Jury, but he got smashed on the ground by Jim Miller, and then he got submitted on the ground most recently by John Tuck. All 4 of his last losses have been in the first round, and if I'm Dong Hyun Kim, I get this fight to the floor immediately and then just see what happens there, because once you are not getting punched in the face by Gomi, you're in a pretty good position. So I have to pick Dong Hyun Kim. He's younger. He's clearly in a better position than Gomi. But if he chooses to stand and bang and make this exciting, Gomi could win, but it's very unlikely. So my pick is going to be Kim. Now, moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have a women's strawweight contest between Claudia Gadelha, who is 15-2, taking on Jessica Andrade, who is 16-6. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Gadelha minus 265 to come back on Andrade at plus 185. And right now, looking over 5 dimes, it's Gadelha minus 280. Andrade is at plus 240. So a little bit more action coming in Gadelha's way. And again, there's a lot of parlays that get played over 5 dimes as well. So people were probably linking Gadelha more than anything else into parlays right now. This is a tough fight. I mean, for both ladies, obviously. Stylistically, it does favor Gadelha. Andrade obviously had a heck of a run thus far at 115 pounds. I mean, not a lot of fights there, but I'm saying the people that she has faced, she's basically destroyed outside of the champion. And then she did get picked apart in that title fight, I'll tell you that. So I'm a little bit surprised. I thought she would fare a little bit better in that spot, but credit to Jędrzejczyk, I mean, for delivering on that fight. I mean, she looked phenomenal in that spot. But that being said, I mean, these are probably the number 2 and number 3 ranked girls legitly. I mean, I don't even know what exactly they got Andrade ranked in the UFC rankings right now, but I mean, these are definitely 2 of the, best, at least top 5. I mean, Gadelha, in my opinion, would be the champion right now if it wasn't for her cardio, her lack of cardio, I should say. So, I mean, she's the only one that's really had, the champion in a lot of trouble, beating her, to the point where, I mean, you could see her possibly losing, and then her cardio just gave up, and she just kind of folded, and Jędrzejczyk took over and won those fights. So this is a 3-round fight, though. This isn't a title fight. So I think Gadelha will be really strong, at least 2 out of the 3 rounds. Now, of course, she's trying to address her cardio issues. She's working hard. I understand that. So maybe she goes 3 strong rounds, which is great, because I think, again, if Gadelha can go 5 strong, man, it's going to be hard for anybody to beat her in the UFC. So here, she's going to look to take this fight to the ground. I think Andrade she has decent takedown defense. She's not the easiest person to get to the ground, and you have to watch out for her guillotine choke because, I mean, she's caught and finished many people with that guillotine choke. She has great technique with it, and she's got so much power behind it to go along with it that once you're in, I don't care, I mean, who you are, even Gadelha, I mean, she could catch a lot of people in that choke. So Gadelha's jiu-jitsu background obviously should keep her out of trouble. She's a smart fighter. I don't think she gets caught up in that guillotine choke, and I think she's able to probably finish Andrade on the ground if it does hit the ground as well. If she doesn't finish her, then she'll probably grind her out enough that she gets the win on the scorecards. On the feet, I'm expecting it to obviously be a little bit close too as well. I think it'll go back and forth. Gadelha's striking ability has actually improved quite a bit. She could do some damage on the feet. She's just such a complete fighter overall. But I don't know if you want to play with that fire with Andrade. I mean, she hits really hard, and that's her path to victory really is just, trying to keep things standing and trying to knock people out. So I think Gadelha's going to fight smart here. She's going to have to stand and bang a little while, but I think when she's able to get the fight to the floor, she's going to exploit Andrade's weakness, and that's just that. So I'm going to pick Gadelha to win. She just got to be cautious. I mean, she has to fight smart, keep her hands tight, and watch out for those big bombs Andrade throws, and watch out for that guillotine. If she's able to avoid all that, she's going to probably have a highlight reel, maybe finish, or a very impressive win on the scorecards for her. So Gadelha is my pick.
Yeah, the big difference here is in terms of technique. Claudia Gadelha is so much more technical than Jessica Andrade. Andrade is an extremely aggressive fighter that can push a great pace. And I mean, I thought that she was so aggressive and could push such a high pace that she could even beat Joanna Jędrzejczyk in her last fight. But clearly, Jędrzejczyk was able to just utilize range, keep Andrade at distance, and just pick her apart on the feet. It was an incredible, masterful performance by Jędrzejczyk. and I'm sorry I ever doubted her. And against Claudia Gadelha, it is another really tough fight here for Andrade, because I know Andrade is a physical and capable fighter, but Gadelha is talented on the feet. Like, she dropped Young Jacek when she fought her a couple times in the rematch, and Gadelha is extremely good on the ground. Now, Andrade does have a nasty guillotine choke, so if Gadelha is shooting in for a takedown, she's going to have to be careful, not leave her neck out, because as even the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts, great fighters, can get tapped out if they just shoot in and get caught. I mean, look, Colby Covington's one of the best fighters in the welterweight division, left his neck exposed shooting for a takedown, Warley Alves guillotined him. Moicano left his neck out shooting for a takedown, Ortega guillotined him. So it happens. So Gadelha has to be cautious when she does look to get this fight to the floor, because I'm almost certain she will. Gadelha can probably hold her own in the stand-up, but why risk it? Andrade, beyond the guillotine choke, doesn't have a whole lot to offer on the ground. I mean, she's capable on the canvas, but she got beat up on the ground in her UFC debut at bantamweight by Liz Carmouche. She got tapped out by Marion Renault on the ground. So, like, I definitely feel with how incredibly good Gadelha looked in her last fight against Kovalkiewicz, there's just no way Andrade is going to be able to fend off Gadelha once this fight hits the floor. Gadelha just looks like she's taken her game, and it was already elite. I mean, she's clearly been the number 2 girl in the division behind Young Jacek since this all started. But she clearly has set herself up as head and shoulders above every other contender, too. I mean, Kovalkiewicz was, like, people were arguing maybe, Kovalkiewicz is the number 2, and Gadelha just steamrolled her in her last fight, got a very quick first-round submission. So I think that could happen here. Andrade, as aggressive as she is on the feet, Gadelha might be able to utilize that to her advantage and find an opening to get it to the floor. And once it goes to the ground, I think that she either gets a TKO victory at some point on the canvas, or maybe taps Andrade out, because again, Andrade has been vulnerable on the ground. So my pick is going to be Claudia Gadelha. I just think she's just another level beyond Jessica Andrade, as long as this fight is not just a pure stand-up fight for 3 straight rounds. Now this takes us to the main event of the evening. We have a light heavyweight contest between Ovin St. Preux, who is 20-10, and returning UFC fighter Yushin Okami, who is taking the bout on short notice, and he is 32-8 overall. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I open OSP minus 555. The comeback on Okami at plus 365. Right now over 5 times it's 490. Minus 490 for OSP. The comeback on Okami at plus 390. So line margins have tightened up a little bit as well. Two-way action coming in on this fight. Nothing crazy as of yet. Again, people are parlaying OSP. I'm sure there's some straight bettors coming in on Okami at the dog price as well. Obviously, Okami deserves respect. I mean, he was one of the best middleweights ever on the UFC roster, honestly. I mean, the fights that he's won throughout his career, the people that he's faced, I mean, you got to respect the man. I understand he fell short, never wore that gold in the UFC, but he was always a top-tier middleweight for the most part of his career. I understand, again, I mean, towards the end of his career, he was starting to decline a little bit. I mean, the UFC let him go. I think the UFC shouldn't have let him go, honestly. He still was relevant enough, but I get it. It's business. Outside of the UFC, Okami ended up dropping actually down to welterweight, and he started having some success there. At first, I mean, he did suffer a loss to John Fitch. He got out-grinded by Fitch in that spot. But since that time, I mean, he looked pretty good. I mean, the weight cut went better for him, it seemed, and he just, he ran off, I think, a couple, like 4 or 5 victories, if I'm not mistaken, in outside of the John Fitch loss in the welterweight division. So, against okay competition, and that most of those have been, well, I shouldn't say most, but some of those were in World Series of Fighting. So, I mean, against decent competition, again, he had an impressive win over Paul Bradley, which Bradley's never an easy out either, in that mix of World Series of Fighting. So that's the kind of fighter Okami is. It looks like he rejuvenated himself a little bit. I mean, he's found his home at welterweight. Now all of a sudden he's taking a last minute call up as a replacement fighter for Shogun, 2 weight classes above that. So he goes from welterweight up to light heavyweight, which is kind of crazy. Now, again, Okami wasn't necessarily a small middleweight. So back in the day, if you saw Okami fighting at light heavyweight, it wouldn't be too much of a shocker. But again, now from going from 170 pounds to 205, to me, at age 36, the punishment that he's taken, he's been knocked out 5 times. I'm not so sure this is all a good thing for him, especially with a guy that can strike and can finish people as OSP can with decent takedown defense to boot. So, I mean, not much more to say here. I mean, OSP is a legit light heavyweight. He's improving. I think he's going to be a little bit too dangerous. Again, Okami's going to have to probably stuff OSP against the cage, get some takedowns along the way, and just kind of beat him like OSP's been beaten in the past. I don't think Okami's going to really outstrike him. Okami's striking's not bad, but I think that OSP is going to have him. He's a little bit more unorthodox on the feet. He's a harder hitter, obviously. He's going to have some size over Okami, so I don't think Okami's going to want to stand and bang too much, especially, like I said, with his chin not getting any younger, and OSP really presenting that much power and that much of a threat on the feet. So it is what it is. I think OSP is going to have a highlight reel knockout here, honestly, and I think this is just a horrible fight for Okami. But it is in Japan. I understand the marketing factor for UFC. They had to jump on somebody quick, and Okami's a big enough name that it could probably get by okay in this spot, even though it is kind of a weird situation here. So head scratcher to me across the board with this main event. I think Okami's going to kind of regret stepping in here on short notice because OSP is going to put him out. But, I mean, outside of that, this fight, I think from top to bottom, this is a very solid card. So my pick is OSP to defeat Okami by knockout. And let me just say this quickly. From top to bottom, again, this is a very tricky card, as Brian and I were discussing. So make sure you guys check our MMAOddsBreaker.com stat picks, because that's where the final picks are going to be displayed for this event for Brian and I, in case we make any last-minute changes.
Overall, this fight is probably going to be one-sided. I mean, Ovince St. Preux, he's a top 10 UFC light heavyweight, and Yushin Okami is not a top 10 middleweight. He's not a top 10 welterweight, and he's been fighting welterweight lately. So, man, you would think this would be a huge mismatch. Okami has been impressive at welterweight, like he's looked better lately. But that being said, OSP, while he has not had his best performances, losing those fights to John Jones, which you can't blame him for, obviously, but the very poor performances against Jimmy Manuwa and Ozdemir, I would say he kind of bounced back against Lima in his last fight, and he's trying to build some momentum again. And I think this is a fight where he can. Okami's a name, but he's basically 2 weight classes apart from St. Preux. Okami's going to be given up 5 inches in reach, and he's not much shorter, but I think physically St. Preux is going to be a lot stronger. Okami has good wrestling, but is he really going to be able to take down OSP? I doubt it. Plus, St. Preux has some pretty sneaky ground ability. I mean, the best light heavyweights wrestlers have been able to kind of take advantage of that. But, OSP, I mean, this guy used to be throwing out calf slicers and stuff back in his Strikeforce days. I mean, this guy knows what he's doing on the ground. So I don't think Okami is going to be able to utilize his wrestling here. And then on the feet, Okami has serviceable boxing, but OSP has heavy hands, a good strong left hand, and Okami has been knocked out repeatedly. His chin is clearly a question mark. He got finished several times in the UFC at middleweight. He got finished by Dave Branch in World Series of Fighting. So I think OSP at some point connects with one of his heavy left hands and probably puts Okami out. I mean, it's great to have Okami back, but I'm not going to be shocked one bit if he drops not just 1, but 2 weight classes down to welterweight for his next UFC bout. So my pick is going to be St. Preux, and I think he wins relatively easily. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 117. Premium bets will be released this Thursday, so later today, following the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMA OddsBreaker Premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of all free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes Sportsbook. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.